The show's an abomination and the books are better. Well, we got that out of the way. So now that anyone who likes the show bounces in here, well, they can just bounce right on out too. They've heard me say the truth at the beginning of the video. It's an abomination. It was from the first frame of the first episode. You don't even have to be a book reader to see that the show's bad either, but once you do take that context in, I mean, it's not even a question anymore. Anyway, let's get this party started. Well, obviously it's not a surprise that I hate the show. And if you've ever seen my name anywhere on the internet talking about Wheel of Time anything, that is SB129 being my name, then you would have known that I hate it. I hated this show to begin with, too. And I know I'm not going to be the first one that airs their grievances about the show either. Far from it. But I noticed that not every other person detailed everything. But I want to. I want to go through all 8 episodes. Season 1, Season 2, and damn. Fucking Season 3, whenever that comes out. March, whatever. And I want to detail every single thing they got wrong. And I mean all of it. So for sure, I'd say that's kind of ambitious for me, considering my my kind of lack of video knowledge. But all I need for this is the show, unfortunately existing, and the books, which I have right over there. Those things are going to be so marked up with sticky notes, it's going to be crazy. You know, last time with the Twisters, I kind of felt an obligation to do that one, because Twister is my favorite movie. So if I don't have anything to say about the so-called sequel, which was thoroughly undeserving of its name, then when can I say something about it? No, but Amazon did something a lot worse, though. This time, it's a lot more sinister, I think. You know, I had to be a right to be disappointed with the other one, but this one is just... But this is such an abomination, I could definitely not stay silent about it. And Amazon's not content with just being wrong, but just being ignorant. You know, that'd be one thing. That'd be bad, but that'd be understandable if it was just 1 or 2 big things wrong, or just they didn't know. No, somebody knows something over there at Amazon. Somebody knows something, because they're doing everything they possibly can to subvert this. To systematically destroy Wheel of Time. Sometimes, though, in the most baffling ways imaginable. But most of the time, it's on purpose. That's the worst part, it's on purpose. I could point to other times this happened too, like Disney Star Wars. Plenty of examples there. You know, Ghostbusters 2016, which is so bad I have to add 2016 to it because they pretended like the other one didn't exist. And Terminator Dark Fate. Oof. Now that's a doozy right there too. But actually, what I think was done to Wheel of Time by Amazon is actually a lot worse than even those examples. And don't you worry, I'm gonna explain why. You don't have to worry about that, if you're still here. But first, the spoilers! Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of spoilers for the books and the show. And I couldn't give a fuck about spoiling the show, of course. But I do give one for the books. So, it'd be kind of demanding of me to ask to read, you know, even half the books, but at least for Season 1, plan on reading Book 1. You know, you don't have to know anything about it for this video. If you don't know anything about the books for this video, then that's fine. But at least for when I get to episodes 1 through 8, it would help if you knew the first book because, you know, that's what Season 1 is supposed to be based on. You know, we'll see. Or actually, you'll see, I already know. Because, like, if I have to use something from, like, book 10 or 11, or even the last book, or New Spring, the prequel book. Like, I'll use whatever I have to make a point, to get a point across, or to explain something's significance. So, as I said, Amazon made sure that this was going to be bad. I think somebody over there made sure this was going to be bad. I mean, they were deliberately, like, twisting and burying the original books that this is supposed to be based on. And to that end, it extends, like, to every aspect of the original story of the books. The story itself, of course, the characters, the setting, and even the items, even the one power itself. It could be the biggest of idiotic changes, like the fucking ways, what they did to that, all the way down to the smallest and most seemingly insignificant detail, like the Aes Sedai rings. You know, you didn't think they could fuck the Aes Sedai rings up? But don't worry, they found a way. They found a way. So, as far as the storyline goes in the show, it's only, like, very loosely based on the book, I'd say. If you have, like, the bare bones outline of the, of book 1, that's kind of what the show pretends to be in season 1. Although, they don't even have the full skeleton, if that's the case. You know, they got, like, a femur here, like a humerus over there, like a bit of the skull, back there somewhere. So they couldn't even get the most basic outline all the way correct. They got some of the way, but they couldn't even do that all the way. And honestly, that's pretty darn stupid. Because wouldn't you think that transplanting a story that's already been written from one medium to another would be pretty damn easy? Because I would have thought so. Would help if it had more than 8 episodes, though, for sure. But don't you think, you know, the book having already been written, the story is already concluded, you have all the information from across 15 books that you could draw from, that you could just do it correctly? Nah, though, nah. I'm not gonna do that. Now, instead, the show seems to take their inspiration from the Dust Jacket, or maybe from Cliff Notes. Or maybe they just went to Wikipedia and just read the synopsis on the book instead of actually reading it. You know, you could at least try to get more of the story in there from the books. You know, especially when it comes to Robert Jordan, the details matter. And speaking of details, let's get on to the book, so we can compare just a tad. So in the first book, The Eye of the World, the main story is that the group from the Two Rivers are escaping Shadow Spawn that are chasing them, and they learn about the world, and it ends with Rand defeating the bad guy at the end, Baal-Zaman. And he also weakens the Dark One's hold on the land. So there's a lot of traveling that happens. There's a lot of learning about the world and themselves, too. They gotta deal with the darkness that comes their way in their own ways. Usually, they gotta deal with it by themselves or with just one other person. And they don't even know if everyone else is alive. They're just kind of blindly trusting. So, like, to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty, it's like things like Nynaeve has to come to terms with the fact that she doesn't know everything and she has to trust people when she'd rather just trust in herself. And she also doesn't like the fact that she can channel. And in Egwene, she just like completely changes the direction of her life by deciding she wants to go to the White Tower and be an Aes Sedai. Then Perrin, of course, establishes the wolf connection. And he also, this is the first time he has to grapple with being in charge, which also comes back later. And then Mat has to deal with the consequences of his actions, because he stole the dagger from Shadar Logoth, and he gets infected by the city. And he also doesn't like the fact that he has to have Aes Sedai help to to heal him of that link. And then Rand, of course. So Rand's the main character, don't forget that. He has to bear the weight of finding out about Tam not being his father during the attack on the two rivers. He's got to support Matt when they're both, they think they're the only ones that made it. I mean, Rand holds out hope, but Matt's kind of a doomer because he's holding on to that dagger at the time. And he also has to deal with the fact that he's the Dragon Reborn by the end of the story. Because, make no mistake, like I said, this is Rand's story. You know, there are other main characters, but he is, like, the main of the main characters. The entire story is about him. He's the Dragon Reborn, after all. And so he's the one that's gonna have to fix everything at the end of the series. And, you know, that's not even a spoiler anyways. If you just read the first book, you can tell he's the main character, alright? And then we have the show. So Season 1, by contrast, follows like the barest outline of what I set up above. So like as an example, yeah, Rand does turn out to be the Dragon Reborn, and like he can channel and all that. So here's an example. The execution of when you find out that Rand can channel in the show is just done in the most stupid way imaginable. You know, I don't want to get too in-depth because I'll save that for the episodes, but there's like 1 or 2 moments in Season 1 where you even have the slightest inkling that he can channel. And because a TV show is a visual medium, if it's not really shown or implied, then it didn't happen. You know, that's just how it is. There wasn't even dialogue about it either. There was no like thoughts in his head like, whoa, did I do that? No, there's none of that. It was very obvious in the books. But then the funny thing about that is, at the end of Season 1, in Episode 8, there's a flashback to all those moments, supposedly, where he did channel. And they're like, whoa, you know what, actually, guess what? He did channel. Because guess we forgot to show you until now. Funny thing, huh? So something like that sounds kind of small, right? Kind of sounds like, who cares? You know, you didn't know till the end in the book, and you didn't know until the end in the show. Who cares? Well, first of all, it shows that you don't know who the main character is. And second of all, it shows that you didn't read the book. Because if you read it, then you would know before the end of the book that he can channel. And so, comparatively, someone who watches the show should know that he can channel before the end of the season, okay? That should be good writing on the show's part, if it existed. And since they don't do that, they're just wasting everyone's time by pretending that he's not channeling. They're like, oh man, who could it be? What's going on here? No. Those moments should be peppered into the show, into the episodes, to actually show what happens. I shouldn't have to reference the book every 5 seconds when I'm watching this thing, but I will. And yeah, you still have Matt and the dagger, and that's handled very idiotically in the show. And Egwene, well, they kept her wishes in the show because they want her to be the main character. You'll see. And then Nynaeve is like, she can do no wrong, she knows everything already in the show. She doesn't have any growing to do there, like, at all. Oh man, and then there's Perrin. My boy, what did they do to Perrin? Holy fuck. You know, they character assassinated Rand to no end, but really, they did Perrin, like, almost worse, I think. You know, you'll see when we get to episode 1. He starts with episode 1, they start fucking up his story. And obviously, beyond the overarching, like, you know, big story across the entire season, there's a bunch of, like, smaller little things, little subplots that have been completely deleted from the show. And what is left is bad, because it's done incorrectly. You know, the book was very cohesive about foreshadowing stuff. You know, I don't want to pretend like Robert Jordan knew when he was writing book 1 what would happen in the final book. Although I do think he probably did know quite a few things that he was setting up. But like, he revisits everything from his previous writings down. So like, there's this one time where Matt and Rand, when they're on their way to Camelin, which is not in the show, by the way. So they're on their way to Camelin, they get a ride from this guy in his wagon for a little bit. And then they get off his wagon when he starts to make a turn in the road and they have to keep going on the road. And guess what? That guy comes back to the story in the second to the last book to show off Rand's transformation after he gets into his Zen state. So yeah, even something as small as that like comes back. It's crazy. But you better believe you can't do that if those events never happened in the show. So it's like, good luck with those kind of subplots. Oh no, now we got the characters themselves. Well, I kind of mentioned it a little bit in the story section before. But where do I fucking start? Well, I'm not going to get into specifics again. I kind of did last time. But let's bring up one singular aspect of them. And that's that these aren't really like teenagers or young adults in the show. Like, all the 4 of them are like full-on adults. They've all been aged up. And this really messes up with the characterization of them. Because Rand, Perrin, Matt, and Egwene, like in the first book, in the very first part of it, they're like teenagers, essentially. They're just like teenagers starting to grow up a little bit. Of course, I'd say Rand and Perrin were already like most of the way there, but Matt still had some growing up to do if you read the book. You just have to read a couple chapters to know that. So, what happens when you age them up? Well, all of a sudden you can't translate the same things from the book to the screen. All of a sudden you've messed that up instantly. Because now it's not that this full-on grown adult has to go back home and do chores and stuff, or help the other adults like they're subservient to them or whatever. All of a sudden you have to say, well, they wouldn't be doing that if they're like, 25 or 30 years old. Because none of these guys look like they're, teenagers like they should be. Because by the end of the book, like, you can tell that everyone has already, like, grown all the way up. They've matured all the way. Even Egwene. Because Egwene was pretty much almost there in the book, even at the beginning. But by the end, you can tell that there's growth in her, too, because she had to endure quite a bit, just like Perrin did. Just imagine how weird, like, the Chronicles of Narnia would be if the kids were, like, full-on teenagers or adults. Or, like, how different would Harry Potter have to be if they were not kids, if they were full-on adults, or, like, late-stage teenagers? Like, they would not learn the same things. A lot of things are very different just from that. And I think Amazon wanted to do that because they wanted to have their own Game of Thrones type deal. Because Game of Thrones is rated R, and they have to do... There's certain things that come with that label. And Amazon was like, well, we want our piles of money too, right? So we have to just copy Game of Thrones. That's all there is to it. And that's funny because I've never even seen Game of Thrones, but I can tell what they're trying to copy. And you'll see once I get into the actual episodes themselves. But just know this, aging them up seems kind of a small thing, but actually it's not. And you'll see when we get to episode 1. You'll see how much it's messed up in episode 1. And suffice to say, nobody is their actual character from the book either. So I think the closest person to their book counterpart is Tam Althor and maybe Loyal. But pretty much everyone else is a different person entirely, just about. Now you can't tell me that Matt in the show and Matt in the book is the same person. Like, you just can't, let alone their family. You'll see that. You'll fucking see when we get to that. And then lastly, and almost more importantly for this, is the setting. Now I say almost more importantly because now we're moving from the realms of words on a page to the screen. You would think that the setting, the world itself, would be somewhat of a priority, right? And it's not like Robert Jordan wasn't detailed. He was very detailed about all the stuff that he wrote about. And that extends to the world, it extends to like what people wear and stuff. He was very detailed. You know, some people don't even like that, but at least that would come in handy if you were like making a show or something crazy like that. So with that in mind, think about all the locations that are in Book 1 that weren't in the show. The shit show. Think about that. So, did we ever get to see Watch Hill or Devon Ride? Did we ever hear about them? Maybe. I think we heard about them at least once. Did we see them? Nah. Do we get to see, Taran Ferry? No. We get to see the ferry going across the River Taran. But do we actually see Taran Ferry, the village itself? No, we don't. Do we ever get to see Whitebridge? Nope, I don't think so. Did we get to see Four Kings, which is an actual village and not an inn? Nope, I don't think so. Shadar Logoth? Oh, we actually did get to see that, but it was wrong because it was very much different. They didn't even get Ma Ching-Chin right either. And, speaking of Four Kings, not being an inn, how many inns did we see besides the, Wine Spring Inn? Did we ever get to see really any? Oh wait, we got to see Breen Spring, wow. Did you know that that's actually a location they didn't go to in the fucking book? Yeah, they never even went there. It was something that was only mentioned. Imagine that. So we don't get to see, Baerlon, we don't get to see Whitebridge, we don't even get to see Camelin. But don't worry, we got to see Breen Spring. Yeehaw. Did we ever get to see the remnants of, Ardor Hawkwing? Or the Tower of Genji from the deck of the Spray? No, we don't. We don't get to see any of that. But you know what else we get to see? Of all things, we get to see Tar Valon. Wow. Guess what wasn't in the fucking book? Guess what wasn't in Book 1? Yep, Tar Valon. They didn't go to Tar Valon in Book 1. That was the backup spot if they didn't make it all the way to Camelin, or if they were in Camelin and didn't find everyone. But no, we didn't go to Tar Valon in the book. We went to Camelin. And you know, a very good percentage of Book 1 was everyone trying to make it to Camelin. And yet that's completely absent in every way. I don't even remember how many times it's mentioned, but it couldn't even be that much either. And of course, I'm gonna have a lot to say about the fucking ways and how Amazon fucked that up so royally, it's unimaginable. And that being said too, I'm gonna be going into excruciating detail with this because it's just so easy. Like, you know, how come the Dark One doesn't have a touch on the world? Like, you know, that was kind of a significant thing from the first book, but whatever. It was just the very first scene of the very first chapter of the very first book is all. No big deal. It even goes beyond just the world, too. Beyond the world, beyond the characters, and the story. They didn't stop there. They fucked all of it up. All of it. You know, the channeling doesn't even look right. It looks like magic smoke. It doesn't look like threads. And then, the objects of power that we see are not the right ones. Not even the rings themselves, the regular Aes Sedai rings, not even those are right. But there's like some weirdo Tirangrial that we see that don't make any sense no matter how you slice it. That just break the world if you have any clue what happens later on in the story. So yeah. And let me throw this out there too. I just hate this modern trope of a season being only 8 episodes long. I've heard from a couple places that this is to make binging a whole season easier to do. But that doesn't make any sense in this case, though, because this is Amazon we're talking about, not Netflix. Netflix is the one that releases whole seasons all at once. Amazon's Wheel of Time came out weekly. You know, the first 3 came out all at once, but everything else you had to wait another week to see it. And do you want to tell me why they couldn't have made it 13 episodes or something? It isn't like it would have done much better, but, you know, there was a chance. Besides, it's not like we had $1 million visual effects for the entire runtime of these 8 episodes. I mean, you look at something like Stargate SG-1, the earlier seasons there, they had like 20 episodes per season, 44 minutes long. So you don't want to tell me that they couldn't have done something similar here. But I guess since the show was an abomination, I might as well be content with the fact that it was only 8. But even still, just imagine if the show had been decent or good. I'd still be complaining about 8 episodes. Oh well. I'm glad Season 3 is only going to be 8 episodes, tell you that right off the bat. So you might be wondering why this is such a big deal to me, and but why I think it's also a big deal to other book readers and enjoyers. So, you might think of Wheel of Time as some big ol' franchise since Amazon has their claws in it right now. But for most of the time, it wasn't. No, for the longest time, all we really had were the books themselves, a couple of extras books, like The Companion and Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. We had some ancient video game from the 90s, and then we also had some officially licensed jewelry. And Amazon even managed to fuck that up somehow. We used to have pieces of jewelry like the Korsuvra or Matt's Foxhead Medallion, or the Twisted Stone Dream Terangriel. But now, right after Amazon took over, they changed it to just be the Aes Sedai rings. Which is funny because the officially licensed jewelry is actually correct to what the book says, but the actual props on the television show are wrong. Funny how that is. And I happen to have a couple of pieces from before Amazon too. I've got the dedicated sword pin and the Ashaman dragon pin. I'm glad I got those when I did too. The only other thing Amazon put out, I think, was some weirdo officially licensed watches for some reason. Some cringe shirts, and then some regular shirts with just like the Wheel of Time logo on them. You know, it's just Amazon messing everything up like usual. So anyways, for the average reader, before Amazon, I'd say pretty much you'd only know about the main books themselves, and perhaps the video game. Because I remember, see, I'm not a reader from the get-go. The first book came out before I was born, and I only just read the first book, The Eye of the World, in 2008. So I'm not even going to pretend like I've been there since the beginning, because I wasn't. But I remember even all the way back then, all I really knew was the books and the video game, because if you searched Wheel of Time back then on YouTube, you pretty much just got people speedrunning the game or just let's playing the video game. And then I found out about the licensed jewelry by going to the Phoenix Comic Con, so, you know, kind of a happy accident there. And aside from that, there was plenty of fan sites and JordanCon, an official convention. And that was like literally all that was going on for Wheel of Time at that time. There was books, there was jewelry, and there was a convention. And once the final book came out in like 2013, I had figured that that was pretty much going to be the end of it. But you know, at least we got our ending. We were satisfied. If anything more was going to happen, it was probably going to happen in the future. You know, that's what I thought, and that's what I'm sure many others thought too. Because here's something else you have to understand about Wheel of Time if you're not a book reader and you're not a show watcher. is that the popularity of Wheel of Time is confined mostly to fantasy and literature circles. Like, only book people kind of really know that much about it. The wider public world doesn't know anything about it. At least nothing close to what they do know about, like, the big name, you know, the big hitters, like The Lord of the Rings, or Game of Thrones, or even the Chronicles of Narnia, because that was, you know, in movies. Even that would be mentioned before Wheel of Time would. It's kind of like if you're a fan of Stargate, like I am, when they have stuff bouncing around like Star Trek and Star Wars, you know? It's kind of that kind of feeling on the sci-fi side of things. Like, there was only a few YouTube channels that even mentioned Wheel of Time. That's how, like, low-key it was. Let alone full channels that were dedicated to it. And some of those were just offshoots of fan sites, too, at the time. And at least one time I know that happened in reverse, funny enough. But, like, some of the most in-depth channels about Wheel of Time weren't even, like, full Wheel of Time channels either. That was just, like, they were, like, fantasy book channels in general. And times have not changed on that front either. But I would have to say the show bears some responsibility there. So then you'd think, well, that's a good way to get it into the public conscious. Make a TV show or make a movie. And it's like, well, yeah, we've had rumors of shows and TV shows and movies. They've been going back all the way since the turn of the century. There was all kinds of rumors that popped up here and there. Nothing ever came of it. But then, like 2 years after the last book came out on February 8th, 2015, something did happen then. In the deepest part of the night, at like 1:30 in the morning, on a cable channel, FXX, something disturbed the usual paid programming slots. It was a pilot called Winter Dragon. I almost said that it aired, but that's kind of giving it a little too much credit. So this supposed pilot was a lackluster retelling of the prologue from book 1. And it was made with such a shoestring budget, I could have sworn it was like high schoolers putting it together. It almost seemed like they hoped as few people would see it as possible since they put it at like 1:30 in the morning. But it could also be that particular time slot is very cheap. It could be both, actually. Lol. So you're like, who did this, and why'd they do it? Well, it was done by none other than Red Eagle Entertainment, who just so happened to own the rights to make a Wheel of Time show. And within days of this so-called pilot airing, they would have lost those very rights. So obviously, they were just going to do what anyone would do in that situation. And make a super cheap, shoddy piece of media as cheap as humanly possible, and then stick it in the cheapest slot that could be found on all of television. The paid programming slot. Like, you could tell this was just made to keep the rights and absolutely nothing else, like that one Fantastic Four movie. Not 1 ounce of passion was in there for the books. Here's a side note, I am going to be reviewing that pilot separately after this. It can serve as kind of a guide as to how I'll treat the actual episodes going forward. So when that pilot came out, like, nobody was best pleased, myself among them. You know, we could all see why it happened, you know, holding rights and all that. And it just, you know, it kind of stung that such a small company held the rights to a show that could be huge if it were done correctly. It could be the next Lord of the Rings if it was done right, especially back then. I also, at the time, thought, well, maybe if it was in the hands of a larger company, then we would be better off, right? Yeah, that was my actual thought process back then. How naive I was. But just think about this, like, Disney had just recently bought Lucasfilm, and I had similar feelings about that, because this was still before The Force Awakens even came out. So I was still like, well, It's not like George Lucas was gonna be making too much more, because he had only made the Clone Wars that came out in theaters, and it was very like, ugh, you know, I don't know, I don't know about that one, Georgie boy. So I was like, well, maybe Disney can make something good of it. Well, boy, I was about to be proven wrong there, since I didn't like The Force Awakens. Damn. I'm making all kinds of good decisions back then, aren't I? Well, apparently so was Red Eagle Entertainment. Because after that pilot came out, there wasn't really much news coming out either. But I do remember Robert Jordan's widow said something about that so-called pilot. She was like, "It was made without my knowledge or cooperation. I never saw the script. No one associated with Bandersnatch Group, the successor in interest to James O'Rigney, was aware of this." End quote. And then Red Eagle actually filed a lawsuit against her. Wow. Imagine that. It was later dropped, though. And then when that suit was dropped in, like, April of 2016, it was announced that a, quote, major studio was working on the TV show. And I think that was Sony at the time, Sony Pictures. You know, we had heard of big-name people so-called involved before, but after that pilot thing and that lawsuit, you know, there was more to go on this time than before. And then a couple of years later, October 2nd, 2018, Amazon Studios themselves finally announced that they had given the green light to a TV series to start production. Now, I gotta be honest, I don't know what Sony was doing that whole time, but I don't know, I guess they were doing something. Funnily enough, as bad and as poor a taste as that pilot was, and comes off as just a means to hold the rights, it actually did end up sticking to the books more than Amazon would. Oh, what a funny world. Isn't it funny how, like, Hollywood just finds ways to make old things that were previously, like, the worst or bad look good by making things that are even worse in comparison? So for me personally, at this time, like 2018 and onwards, I really kind of stopped looking at all the updates. I was kind of like, well, it's in development, so whatever. And I personally was like moving from address to address all over the place, you know. Eventually I was signing a mortgage in 2020, in early 2020. By mid-2020, I was in between addresses due to COVID. Because, you know, we sold our house to we were going to move into the house that was getting built, and then COVID put that on ice. So I was like, man, I gotta live somewhere else now. So I was at someone else's house waiting for ours to get built. And then that's when the Wheel of Time came back on my radar, because I saw that they were announcing when they were going to resume filming. And that was sometime in 2021. I don't remember the actual date. I just remember 2021. And I was like, well, I don't have much else to do. Maybe I'll just reread the entire series in preparation for it. That's a fateful decision that I made there. And I also decided, you know, maybe I won't watch or read up on all the information that I've missed out on this whole time about the show. So yeah, I was like, I'll go into the show blind, and I'll only have the knowledge of the books as my guide. And, well, you'll see how well that choice worked out for me. And I decided to reread it also because it's kind of a tradition, you know? It takes a long time for each book to come out, so obviously some of the knowledge slipped from your mind in between, in their intervening years. So you'd know, like, when a book's coming out, you'd read up all the books up to that point so that when you read the newest one, you had all the context you needed. So I was like, cool, I'll do that with the show. I probably only needed to read the first book, but I had so much time, I was like, I'll read all of it. Well, I certainly had some context for the show, alright. Oh man, that really came back to bite me harder than I ever thought imaginable. And the show was going into the show blind. I think that's what made it extra hurtful for me. Extra painful. And you know, this isn't actually the first time I got destroyed by going into something blind intentionally. Because the first time I did that was also the last time I decided to ever go to a movie on the day of its premiere. And that would be none other than The Last Airbender. I don't think I need to say anything aside from that title. But funny enough, again, Shyamalan actually got more right with that movie, with the cartoon. He got more things right than Amazon did with this show. And by the way, Netflix is damn lucky that Shyamalan already made the worst adaptation, or else Netflix's would be on the chopping block just as much. And I'll get to that too eventually. So anyways, there I was. I just concluded reading the entire series again. I was counting the days down. I was just waiting for that Saturday so I could watch all 3 episodes. Because like I said, they released all 3 of them, the first 3 at once. I don't know why. Especially when there's only 8 episodes. That's like a good portion of them all at once. I don't know why. And I had to wait for Saturday because I work nights, including that Friday night, so, you know. Well, anyway, I saw a few of the Wheel of Time related channels, like, got flown out to see it early. And so I decided to watch some of their spoiler-free reviews about it. And they're like, wow, it's great, you're gonna love it. I get excited because this is gonna be great. It's everything we wanted it to be. And so obviously I hadn't been reading any of the news, like I don't know who's cast for anything. I don't know anything about the story. I don't think I even really knew it was 8 episodes. I just knew this was the release date, and I was gonna watch it on Saturday. That's all. I do remember, though, I was hopeful after watching those spoiler-free reviews. The light-blinded fool that I was. But anyways, I was like, you know what? You know, once that Saturday comes, you know, I'm gonna grab a couple things on the way home. I'm gonna get some food, I'm gonna be all nice and comfy, I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna finally see what a billion-dollar company making a wheel adaptation is truly capable of. And it turns out they were capable of nothing. Holy fuck, what the hell was that? From the first part of the first episode, I could tell that was gonna be painful. Man, I had a lot of hopium back there. Hopium and copium. I was overdosing. So of course there was 3 episodes. And you know, 1 and 2 were still bad. There was still a lot of bad in there. But there was a lot that was neutral too. But 3 is when it like completely went off the rails. You know, we're kind of derailing on 1 and 2. But then 3 were off the rails entirely. And then when episode 4 came out the week after, I knew it was completely over by then. It was Jover. Like, not only was it trash, it was an abomination by then, by episode 4. And then it turns out, it was actually radioactive too. It infected other parts of Wheel of Time. Because what Amazon did, because they own Audible, and they own books, you know, obviously they own a bookstore, and they sell all kinds of crap. Well, they're like, well, let's make an audiobook with, whatever her name is that does more rain. Let's have her read and make the audiobook, then that'll be the audiobook from now on. Let's change all the book covers, you know, at least the first 3, I think. Oh man, let's change the whole site. Let's plaster the ads all over it so everyone wants to come see it and make fun of it. All the book readers can collectively cringe at how bad the show is. Yay! So that first Saturday, when I first saw the 3 episodes, I was like, man, this can't be happening. This is absolutely terrific. Horrific. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go look online, I'm gonna see other people saying that it's bad, and I'm not gonna be by myself, right? That's what I thought, that's what I honestly thought. But much to my surprise, I did not see that many people pointing out the clear and obvious failures of the show just yet. Remember, 3 episodes in. There was a lot of copium, there was a lot of hopium back then, okay? I saw like a lot of praise. Like those two few YouTubers that were talking about Wheel of Time, well, didn't they show their true colors by being turncoats? You know, they were spouting out lore from the books just weeks before, and now they were singing Amazon's praises in the streets, saying that it was great, that they loved it. Man, at least some of the fan sites knew better. They knew it was an abomination. But I knew some of them were engulfed in many civil wars about people wanting to accept the show and the book somehow, saying that it's gonna get better. It's, you know, it's a rocky start, but it's gonna get better. Spoiler alert, it did not get better, and you'll find out. And then some of the fan sites just completely turned to the shadow and accepted the show with open arms. Now, I didn't read too much into JordanCon itself, but I can certainly imagine it was probably paused as well. You know, someone can correct me there. I obviously have no idea, and I'm not going to check either. And of course, I'm going to be avoiding naming any names for any of this, since I'm a literal nobody on YouTube. But all you have to do, though, is go back to November of 2021, and you'll see their opinions on the show as it came out. You know, you can let them remind you how they felt about it back then. Because by now, some of them have reneged on heaping so much praise on Amazon, because it turns out Season 2 was an even bigger disaster. But you better believe they didn't even think about doing that until things cooled down enough for them to be allowed to do so. It was like getting smacked upside the head, though, to know that they absolutely knew the lore, since they were spouting it out beforehand. And then they just step aside and say, yeah, the show's great. I don't know what was going through their heads. I guess they got a lot of money from Amazon. Of course, the one name I think I can name is actually the biggest one of all. And that would be Brandon Sanderson. Yeah, Brandon Sanderson himself. He praised Amazon and Rafe with Season 1. Sanderson said something like that, that the show was terrific, that Rafe did a terrific job or something like that. And he even said that he himself would have made more changes in a couple spots. More! Wow, what a hero. As if I'm ever going to read any of his books again. Good thing I didn't start. I understand that he definitely had a contract of some sort preventing him from saying anything bad about the show, or about the company, or anything like that. But really, if he actually had a problem with the show and didn't like it, he could have just been quiet. That's it. His silence would have been deafening. He could have snuck some things in there, but he could have just been quiet. But no, he just had to sing Amazon's praises as well. And of course, Rafe pretends to be a fan of the original story. I call bullshit to that. I call him liar for that. The amount of damage and division that his show, as the showrunner, his show has wrought will never be completely undone. And that's if it's even ever attempted at all, which I doubt. Rafe's even made sarcastic tweets about, oh well, it's time for me to ruin Wheel of Time. As if he doesn't know what he's fucking doing. Like he hasn't shown any remorse at all, with 2 abominable seasons out, and a 3rd one well on the way. He seems hell-bent on destroying as much as he can of Wheel of Time, as much as he can before it's inevitably cancelled. Because it'll get cancelled, you know, you can mark my words on that, it will. So obviously there's a lot of evil going on there, a lot of shadow, overshadowing everything, especially with Brandon Sanderson had to say about the show, and Rafe. Boy, it was really a dark time, I swear. It was a dark time. So I was like, you know what, I have to wade into the shadows a little bit myself. I had to commit a little bit of evil myself. And of course, that meant going over to Reddit, or as I call it, Plebit. And I went over there, I made an account, I called it Break the Wheel, and I'll explain what that name means down at the end of the video, so stay tuned, I guess. But I made that plebit account in the vain attempt to warn anyone I could exactly why, how, and what was wrong with the show. But of course, I quickly found out that wasn't going to have any success in the paused corridors of the official Watch Show sub-plebit. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do then? I'm going to seek refuge amongst the children of the light. The White Cloak sub-plebit. And that's fine though, because I do walk in the light after all, so I don't have anything to fear with them. So I made sure, like every episode after that, I commented on, I made nice lists about everything they got wrong that I could think of off the top of my head. You know, I went to every post, and if any context was needed for something, if someone was asking a question, I tried to help if I was there. If anyone came up with any excuses for the show, though, all I had to do was quote the books at them, or just point out the logical fallacies, the errors with it. You know, I'm actually shocked that that sub-plebit lasted as long as it did. But you better believe, with Amazon's money on the line, that the Reddit Jannies were definitely going to take notice of us. And they did. And they set forth draconian rules meant to suppress us. And then when that wasn't enough, they're like, well, we'll just make it so no White Cloak can post anything at all, ensuring the end of that sub-plebit forever, effectively. I was like, oh well, fucking oh well. It's not like my prejudices against that site were proven true, simply by the denizens and their actions. And the Jannies. You knew the Jannies weren't gonna take that line down, like, come on. It was only a matter of time. Although it does amuse me to no end that they called us book cloaks for our tendency to quote the books like scripture. You know, as if the source material was inferior or something like that, huh? That seems common in other fandoms too that are infected with the mind virus. I was like, oh well, so be it. Call me a book cloak? Well, I am a book cloak. I was back then when the show came out, and I still am now. Besides, if it weren't for the fucking books, then you wouldn't even have a Light Forsaken show. You know, think about that. One other thing I've neglected to say is that, I don't remember off the top of my head who's in charge of the OST for the Wheel of Time show, but they did a bad job too. Like, everyone just did a bad job. You know, the props, wrong. The clothing, too clean, you know, or wrong. The casting, completely wrong. The story was wrong, of course. The sets, sometimes they only reached adequate at best. But even then, usually it was wrong. And the effects, that was wrong too, so throw that out. Some of the scenes were really dark, so you can't even say that that was good. Like, where were all those millions of dollars? I sure didn't see it on the screen, I'll tell you that much. But you know it's pretty bad when they can't even make an OST that sounds halfway decent. Like, go listen to Lord of the Rings, of course. I don't know, maybe Game of Thrones. Like I said, I never watched it. I don't know if the music's good there, but probably. Probably better than this. Or Chronicles of Narnia again. Great music, you know. Just like the prequels with Star Wars. Like, even if you hate the prequels with a passion, they at least had good soundtracks. Oh well. I hate that I'm such an autist about that sometimes. Alright, anyways, I know I'm rambling. So, with Season 1 ended at the time, the books were still fresh in my mind, the betrayal was still ongoing. I decided to hope that the ratings were just bad enough that this abomination was going to get cancelled. I wouldn't have to endure anymore. I wouldn't have to watch anymore. But guess what? That didn't happen. Because Amazon, for some reason, in their infinite wisdom, decided, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna greenlight Season 2 before Season 1's even out. Wow, what a brainiac move that was. And Season 3 follows a somewhat similar idiotic path too. Not identical, but like similar. Hey, if they want to burn money, they can just send money to me, and I'll take care of it a lot more than this would. If I sound a little salty, it's because I am. It's because I thought that the Wheel of Time was going to be a little immune from all these shenanigans, all these tricks. So, get this. I had hoped that because of the dichotomy of the one power in the world of Wheel of Time, that I wouldn't have to fear that it was going to get paused like it ended up being. Because you see, in the books, if you don't know, it's the women who are the only ones that can actually safely perform magic. That's in the books. And any man who attempts to do so eventually goes insane and dies because their side of the magic is covered with corruption. And of course there are still men as like kings and leaders and soldiers and great captains and all that. Of course that's still there. But there are also plenty of queens. You know, they're far from powerless in the Wheel of Time. Like, take this for instance, the Aes Sedai in the White Tower. They pretty much meddle in the affairs of every country in the known world. You know, tell me if that sounds a little familiar. The only place they don't have sway is a couple places. What's the Aiel Waste, but that's another matter entirely. And Shara, if, you know, you're not going to know what that is, but just trust me. The Shan-Chan, I call him the Sea-Chan in the show. But on the actual continent, it would be Amadisia and Tyr. Amadisia for very obvious reasons, too. But even beyond that, because, you know, most countries have Aes Sedai advisors, even if they don't advertise that to the world. But get this. The Amerlin Seat, who's in charge at the White Tower, she holds so much power, all by herself, that she could command the Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light himself to a meeting, and he'd come. It's stated multiple times in the books that's the kind of power that the Amerlin Seat has. She's the most powerful woman in the world of Wheel of Time, basically. And as far as the Aiel Waste goes, I touched on that for a second. But women hold just as much power there than the men do in a lot of respects. Like, there are clan chiefs and they're guys, but then there's also roof mistresses who own the land. And there's the wise ones who are only women. And they don't even need to be all channelers either. And then of course, if we go to the sea, to the Athaan Mier, the sea folk, you know, the Windfinders, they can channel. And they give their ship speed and all that. And then there's the, I think it's the Sail Mistress who's in charge of the actual ship. And then the Cargo Master is the guy who's in charge of trade and all that, if I remember right. And then there's like the Mistress of the ships and the, I forget the guy. I think the guy's like Master of the Swords or something like that. But the Mistress of the ships leads them all. She's like the queen of them, if you want to think of it that way. And they have wave mistresses that head the clans too. You know, somewhat analogous, you know, in a way to like how the Aiel do it. They're quite different though. But still, quite a few positions of power for the women there, huh? And should I mention a little place called Far Madding? Or the customs of Ebu Dar? Of course I know that because I read the books, but, you know, whatever. So do you see what I mean when I say, like, there was a lot of things that were already in the books that showed me, like, well, maybe they'll just take the books as they are and just accept that the women have power already. They don't have to do anything extra. They don't have to do anything stupid. Well, nope. That was all for naught. I had assumed they had a shield, but yeah, the corruption is just gonna wreak havoc wherever it pleases, unfortunately. And that corruption came in the form of so many unneeded and unnecessary changes, it's crazy. You know, some of these changes are so weird. Like, they went out of their way to be wrong. Like, it would have been easier just to be correct in a lot of circumstances, especially because it's already written down. You don't even have to change that. Like, I get that some changes have to happen when you're adapting a book to the screen. Like, that I understand that, you know, like the Aes Sedai agelessness. That's easy to put down on a paper, but that's kind of hard to do in real life. You know, I think even, like, animation could have pulled that off a little easier than you could in real life. But still, there are other changes that don't make any sense at all. Like the Aes Sedai ring, something as simple as that, or the Oath Rod. Like, give me a fucking break. So, like, I obviously had a bad time with the show, and I've still only seen Season 1. But you know, I could actually tell from the very first moment of the first episode that was not going to be good. And do you wonder what it is I saw? Because it was actually something I didn't see. And that was, guess, yep, it's the prologue from Book 1. You know, like that useless pilot. Well, they decided, let's just delete it entirely. Let's not show it at all. Now that was truly a baffling decision to me. I can't think of any good reason why they got rid of that. Worse, the show's writers, so-called, decided to invent a whole new scene that never happened just for the show. So yeah, we never got to see the real prologue. Instead, we got something that never happened. Wow. Well, we don't call it a waste of time for nothing, do we? So now, the prologue from Book 1 is only 7 pages long. So you might think, why are you making such a big deal out of 7 pages? Well, it's because a lot of information is in those 7 pages. There's a lot of foreshadowing, like stuff that you wouldn't even know on a first read. Until you reread again, you notice all the things, a lot more things are revealed to you. You know, shows off a lot of, like, big-name characters, like Luz Theron Telamon, the original dragon himself, or Ishamael, the betrayer of hope, one of the original Forsaken. It shows the potency of the One Power, and the unnamed True Power, for that matter. It tells you what the Taint is, and how that happened. It shows you how Dragonmount was created, as well as the island that Tar Valon would eventually inhabit. It demonstrates the breaking of the world, and how that also happened all at once. Like, quite a bit of story happens in those 7 pages. And it's not even just that. Well, I mean, it is mostly just that. But, you know, if I want to be on Amazon's side right now, you know what it could have done for them? It could have actually showcased really quickly all those millions and millions of dollars that that was never on the screen. It could have done the visual effects correctly, and then it would have been a spectacle to see Dragonmount actually being created, like showing the true power being wielded, or showing traveling happening, where you could like flash to snapshots of the 100 companions breaking the world, or you could even show a small like snippet of Luz Theron like creating the seals, going over there, marching there with the 100 companions to seal the Dark One. Or if you wanted to, you could also show the female Aes Sedai, because they were all Aes Sedai back in the day, don't forget. You could show the female Aes Sedai talking about the Choden Call or whatever. Or you could have just showed more of the Age of Legends itself. You know, there's so much potential you could have done, effects-wise, to hook people in, so that they wouldn't be bored immediately. But that was all gone. For nothing. And just like that, Amazon is stupid once again. So, you know, I can't tell you why they deleted the original prologue, but all I can tell you is that it was a stupid idea, even for Amazon. I swear they're fucking allergic to money sometimes. Like I said, just send me a couple $1 million and I could probably do more with it than wherever it evaporated during the show's making. So since I'm still talking about the meta of the show, let me get to another order of business that I heard too much back when the show first came out, and I still hear it too, I still see it. And that's that people try to pretend that this all takes place on the same wheel as the books. I don't know why, they just have to have it their way and say, well, it all takes place in the same world. But they'll say, well, maybe it's just a mirror world, or another turning of the wheel, or like a flicker world from the portal stones, or something like that. And absolutely not. Bullshit to that. There are far too many things different for this to be a mirror world, first of all. I'll start with the mirror worlds, okay? So guess what? A mirror world can have quite a bit of variation, but the further away it is from the main, like, real world, the less substantial it is. Here's actually a quote from the actual books. This one seems pale to us because it is a weak reflection, a world that had little chance of ever being, unquote. And that's from The Great Hunt, Chapter 16, if you want to verify it yourself. And guess what was different in that world? The only thing different there was the outcome of a battle. So Arthur Hawkwing won a particular battle against a bunch of Trollocs, and in this world the Trollocs won. So that's it, that's the difference. And that makes the world seem pale and a little insubstantial, and there's no people there. And before you say anything, no, you can't pretend that that means the Shadow won in that pale world and that's why it's so off the beaten path. That's not how it works either. And I have a quote from the books for that one, too. From Varen. She says, there is only one Dark One, who also exists in all these worlds at once. If he is freed from the prison the Creator made in one world, he is freed on all. So long as he is kept prisoner in one, he remains imprisoned on all. End quote. So you know, don't even try and pretend like that mirror world that's pale is because the Shadow won, because it didn't. That's not what happened. And that quote from Varen, of course, that's from The Dragon Reborn, Chapter 21, if you want to try and prove me wrong. Alright, so that's something relatively tame, right? Who won that battle? Arthur Hawkwing or the Trollocs? And that's what makes the world insubstantial. So you want to say something as massive as the dragon can be reborn as a girl wouldn't be a huge change? Wouldn't be massive? Or how about something even stupider? How about something even more moronic? How about this multi-headed dragon? They want to pretend like one thread split into 5. Like that's any easier. Boy, I should love to know what moron came up with that one, by the way. But yeah, so there's absolutely no way this is a mirror world, because there's people in it too. Because Lanfear, you know, she was given some information. You might say she's lying, but she didn't really have much reason to lie about idol stuff like that. Where she's like, there's mirror worlds that you can go to where there's people and everything. I'll get the quote for that one too if you want. So then it's like, alright, well maybe it's not a mirror world. And then they get a little more clever and they think, well, what if the entire show takes place within a flicker of a portal stone? And I'm like, well, you're still not right there. And they'll even cite things like, well, remember all the flicker worlds that we saw that all kinds of different stuff happened there. Everything was wildly different, right? So why can't the show exist over there too, huh? Well, here's the thing about the Flicker worlds. They're chances, they're not actual worlds. They're just chances of what could have been. But you know, if you want to pretend like they're full-on worlds, it's still not going to work. Because everything that happens in those worlds are still born from normal choices and or chances made by the characters or the world in question. So for instance, sometimes simple flip of the coins are like different. Other times it's like choices that someone makes a different, you know, tangent or direction or whatever. And that argument also goes out the door because of the simple fact that these Flicker worlds appear to take like wild offshooting tangents and then stick to them. So if you remember Back to the Future Part 2, with those timelines, it wasn't like the future was identical and only a couple of massive things were like hugely different. It was that everything was hugely changed. So like Biff Tannen, you know, being in charge changed everything about like a lot of the world there. It wasn't like the same future except Tannen has money now. And that's the same thing here. You know, it's not like, oh, it's the same exact thing as the book except for a couple ginormous huge differences. No. Like one of them, Rand stays a farmer, he doesn't leave the Two Rivers. And in that happenstance, he goes on from like a complete tangent, you know, by staying in the Two Rivers, where they hear some of the other events of the world happening, but since he's the Dragon Reborn, he's supposed to be doing something. And even in that Flicker world, he remembers, like, oh man, I feel like I should be doing more than this. Until he eventually dies. And then in another one, he joins the Queen's Guard after Egwene dies, because she was never taught to wield the One Power. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. I'll get to it, don't worry, in an episode. But anyways, he's in the Queen's Guard so long, he, like, eventually forgets the Two Rivers and all that. And he's using the One Power too in that tangent. But you know, these are like still, the fundamental rules are still exactly the same. It's just choices or chances that are different. So like, channeling still works the same way in those Flicker worlds. Like the taint is still there, it still does the same thing to people. Rand is still the dragon, because every time he dies, Ishamael's like, I've won again, Luz Theron. That's why you hear that. Because he's the dragon in every single one of those Flicker worlds, that's why he always hears that. You know, that kind of thing never changes from one to the next. And then, finally, you know, I shouldn't really have to say this after mentioning all that stuff about the Flicker worlds. But, you know, I might as well cover all my bases while I'm at it. So, some people want to pretend like this is another turning of the wheel, of the same wheel. And I'm like, how? You know that the Wheel of Time universe, that time is cyclical, and that some things are always going to be the same. So, let's take one small thing, you know, one little thing, like a male thread. It's always going to be male. You know, did they forget that? A thread in the Wheel of Time is the life of a person. It's kind of like their soul, you know, even though it doesn't have any of their memories. That thread is a life of somebody. But threads stay the same. That's why when one particular Forsaken is put in a different sex body, they still wield the same part of the One Power that their soul is tied to. That's why it makes for a couple of antics on that side of things. So where does the show come off by saying that the dragon can be reborn as a girl? Like, surely the White Tower of all institutions should know that. Something as simple as that. Even in the show. But I guess they're just as clueless. Of course, that's to say nothing about the multi-headed dragon. Like, one thread can become 5 threads. Please. And then, there's another, here's another example, too, that we get from the not prologue. Where, is it Leandrin? I don't even fucking care. Or she says, when you touch the power, you make it filthy. And of course, they still have the 3 oaths. So she's an Aes Sedai and she's saying this, so she's not lying. And even the visual effects in the show make it look like it's happening like that too. So explain how that makes any sense. How does a thread in the pattern that can access the 1 power make it filthy? Explain how that makes any sense when we know it's the Dark One who tainted saidin. And even then, as a matter of fact, on that point, it isn't even really that saidin itself is tainted. It's that the taint lies in between saidin and the Chandler, so if they reach for saidin, they're gonna touch the corruption, the taint, one way or another. You know? And then one last example, which is kind of idiotic too, is when channelers are linked, when they're in a circle, they're safe from burning themselves out. They can't burn themselves out, they can't draw too much, and that's just the hard truth of circles. You know, there's some hard truths in the Wheel of Time, okay? That's one of them. Well, at least in the books, anyways. And here's a quote. I gotta put a quote in for this one, too. The Angreal buffers you against the extra power, and in somewhat the same way, in a circle, you can't be made to draw too much. Unquote. That is from Book 8, Chapter 5. But in the show, Season 1, Episode 8, we see precisely the opposite. Everyone linked looks to be burned out by the one that's leading the circle. Like, literally and figuratively, because, of course, since it's the show, we can't do one thing completely correct. When you get burned out in the books, that just means your ability is burned down. You don't literally burn out unless you draw way too much, like to kill yourself kind of too much. You don't get literally burned with, like, lightning, which is what it looks like in the show. So, of course, they can't even get that right. But something like that just is not possible in the books. And why would that change from one turning of the circle, from one turning of the wheel, rather, to the next? That would be like saying, well, sometimes when the wheel turns, the electromagnetic force changes. Or like the strong or weak nuclear forces. I don't know. Maybe gravity changes from one turning to the next. Doesn't that sound stupid? And it better sound stupid. Because guess what? The 4 fundamental forces obviously exist, because it's a world with the same physics as us. But you know where it exists in the Wheel of Time? It exists in the pattern itself. Because the pattern is the world. That's the universe. The wheel and the 1 power and the threads, you know, they're all separate. The 1 power itself is more basic than even the 4 fundamental forces. Because the 4 fundamental forces exist only in the pattern. So if you want to say that the rules for the 1 power which exist outside of the pattern changes from one turning to the next, like, I don't know what to fucking tell you at that point. Because, you know, the 1 power is what moves the wheel itself, that generates the pattern, so I don't know how that could be different from one turning to the next. That's why I'm like, okay, so you see how the show has all these different changes, wild different moronic changes. Well, that means it's definitely a different wheel. It's a different universe entirely from the book ones. So stop pretending and coping that it's the same wheel, that it's just another turning, it's just a mirror world, it's just a flicker world. It ain't. It ain't. It's another wheel entirely. And that's why I chose my plebit username of Break the Wheel. Because I believe that the show's wheel is different from the real one from the books. And that one day it will be broken when this show finally gets cancelled by Amazon. Because trust me, it will get cancelled eventually. We're not making it all the way to Tarmangaiden with this one. The show absolutely will not make it to Tarmangaiden. You can mark my words on that. Unless, I will say that with a 99% chance. But there is always that off chance that Amazon really, really wants to burn money. And want to pretend like, you know, there was enough there was enough people wanting to see it to the end. So there's like a 1% chance that Amazon is stupid enough to do that. But in the real world, this would have been cancelled after Season 1. It's also funny because I've heard this is the other sentiment I've heard too. They're like, don't you talk the show, man. If it gets cancelled, like, we might have to wait 10 years before we get anything else. Maybe we'll never get another chance. And I'm like, okay, good. Why should I, as a book reader, be satisfied with an abomination? So what if someone came up to me and was like, here, you have to eat this moldy bread, and if you don't eat this moldy bread, then I'll never give you moldy bread or any bread ever again. So, what do you think I'm gonna do? I'm not gonna eat it. I'll just go eat something else. See how easy that is? You see, this show isn't adapting. This isn't like an anime adapting a manga that's incomplete, where they have to add filler or something because the mangaka hasn't, finished enough of the story for the anime that's all caught up to it. And this isn't like a Song of Ice and Fire either, where the the development on that's kind of stalled for the last 10 years. No, we have our books, we have the story, the entire thing. We don't need any interpretation, we don't need to add any filler, we don't need to change anything. If you want to make a show, make it like the damn books. We have the story, and we were just fine before the show disgraced us by existing. And when it gets cancelled, then we'll be just fine afterwards too, even if it takes 10 years. If it takes 10 more years to get another show out of this, so be it. I'm adding all this extraneous stuff in this video because I want the videos about each episode to be about that episode, so I don't have to add anything extra to them, because the episodes themselves are like an hour long, so I'm gonna have a lot to say about them. I don't want them to all be 3-hour long, videos about them, alright? Anyways, let me say this, okay, too. Like I said, I gotta get all the extraneous stuff here. There's another reason why I know the show is not gonna last much longer, and that's this. So, I might have kind of alluded to it a little earlier, but with a property like The Wheel of Time, with a hardcore fan base that likes the books, and with very little in regard to a future, like, how do you think you'd get the word out if you had a new project in mind for it? Because you might just think of throwing money at it until the problem takes care of itself. And that's actually kind of what Amazon attempted to do. They had banners all over their site, they took out ads all over the place. I mean, I didn't see the ads, I got ad blockers all over the place. But I remember they did that. I think they made special tape and boxes to go with it, with the Prime boxes. Because I know they did that for Rang of the Kangs. And they even found enough shills and turncoats to give access and money to, that way. But here's a little something that Amazon didn't have, and they still don't have. They don't have any grassroots support from us, the book readers, like, at all. You see, when the public doesn't know what Wheel of Time is, the ads won't work on them. They'll have, like, zero effect on them. Amazon should know, for the most part, that people only buy Prime for 2-day shipping, and that's, like, it. Like, the average person, if they're tempted by an ad, they'll watch episode 1, like, I don't know, halfway through, quarter of the way through. They'll see it's kind of boring, and then they'll turn it off and never think about it ever again. The average book reader, though, the average book enjoyer, will see the abomination for what it is, and will actively shit-talk the show at every opportunity. In my opinion, at least. The biggest potential evangelizers that Amazon could have had became the biggest detractors. Like, I remember if I heard anyone considering even watching the show, I told them it wasn't worth their time, that it was a waste of time. And I certainly can't speak for everyone, but I'm pretty sure many other book enjoyers did the same exact thing. And I'm not even going to pretend like Wheel of Time would be the next Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or whatever, but if it was done right, it certainly would have had a chance. Because you gotta understand, like, Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings came out at the perfect time when people wanted something fantastical like that. Kind of like comic book movies, you know, they came out at just the right time. And nowadays, it's to the point where if you're not getting those Marvel movies, like, a little close to the comics, then people don't fucking care. Or unless they adapt the bad comics that people don't care about initially either. You know, I've also seen plenty of people that are like, well, I like the show, how come I can't like the show? How come you are saying that I'm not allowed to like the show? And I'm like, you know, by all means, if you like the show, then you can like the show all you want. That's fine by me. It can be your favorite for all I care, actually. I've got my own guilty pleasures, you know, that I know that real fans would consider bad. Like Star Trek 2009, and I think Star Trek Into Darkness was the one that came after that. Like, I still enjoy those movies enough, but I haven't really seen much of the original Star Trek to know how bad they are. Until I watched videos explaining. But I still find those movies adequate, at least, as far as movies go. But you know what I won't do? You know, if I like Star Trek 2009, I'm not gonna go to the original Star Trek fans and say that they're wrong. And that's what a lot of people who like the Wheel of Time show try and do. They try and say that, well, the show is better, so why are you complaining? And I'm like, it's not though, the book's obviously better, that's what came first. So yeah, I've been on both sides of adaptations being bad and all that. And I just want to say, like, if you like the show, then you can like the show. But you can't pretend like we're in the wrong for liking the books better. And there's one other thing you can't do. You can't pretend like you like the show and you like the books at the same time. That's simply impossible. It's like, if I hear someone say that, then as far as I'm concerned, they're a liar. Like, imagine this. If you liked the original Ghostbusters 2016, and I have to add 2016 because they just called it Ghostbusters, as if to try and erase the original one from 1980s. So do you think the people who liked the 2016 version honestly like the original 1984 version? Because I rather doubt it. I'm pretty sure it's 1984, I don't actually know. But anyways, the same holds true here. You either like the books, or you like the show. If you say you like both, you're a liar. Well, the raw recording is hitting an hour and a half, so I better wrap this up. But, you know, like I said, I wanted to get all the extraneous stuff about the show and about the books in this front video, rather than, like, sprinkling it in the episodes. When it comes to the episodes, I want to just talk about them. Them and the books that they're supposed to be based on. That's it. Alright, so after this I'll be analyzing the Winter Dragon pilot, and then I'll get on to the real episodes, okay? So this is SB signing off for now.